Every great person is fundamentally an addict. So what's your internal monologue when an addict is doing meth or heroin? There's nothing other than the addiction. That's how Thomas Edison felt about inventing, how Steve Jobs felt about designing, how Napoleon felt about conquering. A lot of them have traumatic childhoods. It's so interesting the way in which they won't answer questions about them. It's not like it's so traumatic I can't think about it. It's literally like, I'm a shark who smells blood and you're asking me about my childhood. You know what I mean? Like, I smell blood, like I gotta go eat.
Today, I have the pleasure of sitting down with Ben Wilson. He is the creator of How to Take Over the World, which is a podcast about awesome world builders and the best company builders in history. I've kind of thought about a question for a while, which is basically, where are the Napoleons of today?
Well, objectively speaking, they're in private equity. So, someone went and found a descendant of Napoleon, and because he had, his only legitimate son died young, but he had an illegitimate son with this like Polish countess.
As one does.
And his illegitimate, great grandson works for a private equity firm in London. And then his greatest opponent was the Duke of Wellington. And someone found his descendant, and he also works for a private equity firm. So it's like, this is the great warriors of our generation. This is where their energies are being focused, is into further financialization of the economy. So, you might think that's better than warfare. I think many people probably do. I don't.
To me, it kind of feels like the whole, there's one person that builds the entire lineage, and then 3 or 4 or 5 generations in the future, they're doing pointless stuff like that.
Yeah, I mean, the opposing view is at least they're not causing harm, right? They're not, millions of people died in the Napoleonic Wars.
Right.
But at the same time, what does that generate? You've probably heard the saying, for 500 years, the Italians had war and conquest and suffering, and they gave us Michelangelo and Da Vinci. And in the same year, during the same time, the Swiss had 500 years of uninterrupted peace and gave us the cuckoo clock. And so, Heraclitus, the ancient Greek philosopher, says that God is war, or war is God. And I do think, in a certain sense, everyone is playing status games, competition games, and you, at the end of the day, you need the alpha. You need the winner of the top game. Mm-hmm. Like, war is the game that can say to every other game, every other competition, like, no, you're subservient to me. All right, I am the top. And I think of it like, I don't know if you've ever seen those videos of Yellowstone before and after the introduction of wolves, but all the wolves went extinct from Yellowstone, and they reintroduced, which is a national park in Wyoming, and they reintroduced the wolves, and the wolves start eating the deer. So the deer stop overgrazing the grass, which allows the riverbanks to form better, which brings the beavers back. So you have this like huge flourishing. It's like this
complex
desert
adaptive system.
Yeah, it has all these knock-on effects, and it recreates this ecosystem with all this biodiversity by reintroducing these bad guys, these wolves, these predators, right? And they're killing things, but by killing things, they create this great flourishing of the environment. I see the same thing with warriors. Like, yeah, the warrior has disappeared from society, but I think it's creating a desert. And actually, by reintroducing some chaos, some death and destruction, the alpha, the return of the warrior, I think you would have a flourishing of arts and creation and technology, all these other things.
Do you think that it's a little bit like, I know Elon talks about how regulation just kind of is like every new regulation is just a little string, and eventually you have like 10,000 strings and it ties, civilization down, and war is basically the only function for eliminating that. If you look at throughout history, it just doesn't really happen. It just keeps on building unless that happens.
Yes, I think that's correct. I think there's violence is a monopoly, right? And Peter Thiel talks about how important monopolies are, because otherwise everything is defined by competition, which necessarily drives everything down to zero, to nothing, right? Like, in business, you compete away all profits when it's nothing but competition. And you could say the same thing about war, but at the end of the day, someone wins in war, and that creates a monopoly of violence. And that is what creates the figure who can cut through all of these built up regulations and traditions and get things done and establish new ways
Almost
of
becomes
life.
like a mini dictator for a little while.
Yes, correct. And I don't know that you want that as a permanent feature of life, but as someone who can come through and like set things right, I think it's can be important from time to time.
When you're thinking about like company builders, there's this duality of like wartime CEO versus peacetime CEO. And my hunch is basically there is no really great peacetime CEO. I don't really know of a single one. There's people like Warren Buffett where you look at him and you're like, it's Uncle Warren and he's a good guy. But then you look at what he's actually done and he doesn't fuck around.
Well, I mean, I think what people get wrong about that is that like what makes a truly great peacetime CEO is they're always preparing to be a wartime CEO. You know what I mean? It's Warren Buffett says that it's only when the tide goes out that you see who's been swimming naked, you know? And like you look at someone like Rockefeller or Carnegie or Warren Buffett, and what are they doing? It's like they're building a war chest because they're like the Starks, right? They always know winter is coming, you know. And
Warren Buffett's been doing winter is coming to 400 billion in cash or something.
Yeah,
the past few years.
Exactly. And so they don't just survive the winters, you know. They don't just survive during periods of war. They thrive because they've been preparing for it. I think that's what makes a great peacetime CEO.
If you look at someone like MrBeast today, how do you think he is going to evolve as a person? You know, I think he's like 26, 27 now, and he's already got like 1/10 of the population of Earth watching his stuff every month.
I don't know. It's interesting. You know, I think his personality is very, very similar to Walt Disney's. It's just like if you study their lives, always been a showman, obsessed with innovating the medium, obsessed with pouring money back into like they're generating all this revenue and they just like pathologically almost cannot take profit. Like they have to pour it into just making bigger and better content, which is what Walt Disney was doing, which is what MrBeast is doing. But you know, you can look at that and you can say, you know, MrBeast just announced MrBeast Land,
and like
which
Saudi
is like another
Arabia,
step on the wall. And so I do think in a similar way, you can almost trace. They're not the same person, and MrBeast is going to go his own way. But I do think that great founders come in certain buckets and certain types, right? And by figuring out what type a person is, you can sort of say, they might kind of go in this direction by looking at what their forerunners became. And for MrBeast, if I was someone asked me to predict his future, I would probably start by looking at what happened in Walt Disney's life and say, all right, it's probably going to go something along these lines.
Yeah, I was just listening to like a collection of John D. Rockefeller's letters, and it's like the letters to his sons or his son. And he's talking about in the same senses like MrBeast and Walt Disney, he loves having a fire under him. And what that meant for him is any time that he would like unlever himself and pay off his debt, he'd go find more money, you know, go to the bankers and just create the fire.
Yeah.
Create a little bit of chaos.
Right.
He liked being levered up. How do you think about that when you're looking at like other great founders throughout history?
It's one of those things that like people who are risk averse always try and claim that they're more risky than they are. And people who are naturally risk seeking try to claim that they are less risky than they are. You know, like if you had asked John D. Rockefeller, and people did, like, are you a risk taker? He would have said, no, like I'm a very cautious person. And yet he was obsessed with like you said, levering up. I mean, technically, you know, there were times in his career where he was levered up to his shoulders, you know, and it could have all gone horribly wrong for him. So, but they also do have a way of protecting their downside as well. Like a lot of them, I think because they love risk, they know that you can't just bet on black 20 times in a row and like hope to emerge unscathed, right?
Yeah, I think the way that he described it is he likes being in the fire, but he wants to plan for every eventuality, and he's got like a long-term strategy and all the different steps to get there, and there's like all these little dominoes that he's setting up.
Yeah, I mean, you think about someone like Napoleon, and there are like 20 battles where he risks it all, right? and he wins 19 of them, you know? And in every single one, it seems like a 50-50 proposition. All right. You think about like the Battle of Austerlitz and the Battle of Friedland and the Battle of Marengo and like all these battles, and 50-50 proposition, but this guy wins 19 times in a row. What's actually going on here, right? And I mean, gamblers could tell you exactly what's going on, right? Is like he has identified a subtle but important shift in the odds that he's exploiting every single time. And so they seem like bigger gamblers than they actually are. Because no, you don't win 19 coin flips in a row by actually flipping a coin, right? Like, you know, it's weighted a little bit.
I heard this when David Sinner was interviewing Michael Dell recently. He mentioned that basically any time where there has been a situation where there hasn't been a lot of chaos, he would actually just create chaos out of nowhere to align his people.
Interesting. The creation of the intentional creation of chaos.
Yeah. To basically create an enemy where there was none.
To create an enemy where there was none. That's interesting. I don't know that I've ever thought of it quite that way. I think what you see with a lot of these great achievers in whatever domain, right, is like, for example, they're the least introspective group that you'll ever encounter, right? A lot of them have traumatic childhoods and they won't answer questions about them. It's so interesting the way in which they won't answer questions about them. It's not like it's so traumatic I can't think about it, but it's literally like, I'm a shark who smells blood and you're asking me about my childhood. You know what I mean? Like,
I'm swimming.
Yeah, I'm swimming, dude. I smell blood. Like, I gotta go eat, you know? And so I think the chaos is they're just trying to push through walls, right? And when the way is clear, then that's clear. But when the way is not clear, it's like you just have to go start swinging elbows, knocking down walls. And it's like the creation of chaos is an intentional strategy to just push forward, to be able to keep moving forward, which is what they need at any given time.
This kind of feels like Sam Altman right now, where he's created, like, I think, the master of basically creating a whole bunch of counterparties to make it so his company can't fail, because if his company fails, then everyone else along the chain, like Nvidia and AMD and all these other companies, are down bad.
Yeah. I also think, like, if you think that you're winning on the fundamentals, then chaos is a good thing, if that makes sense. So Napoleon famously said, first I engage, then I figure out what to do. Because he knew he was going to win on the fundamentals, right? And it's the same thing with Rockefeller, right? Which is, hey, I can extract and deliver oil cheaper than you can. Those are the fundamentals, okay? Now, if I allow people time to build up different strategies and approach things in a different way, have time to think, then like maybe someone else can come up with a different strategy, can win in certain ways. But like, if I'm creating chaos all the time, I can extract and deliver oil cheaper than you can. That's it. Right. And it's the same thing for Napoleon in warfare, which is, if you've got a really complicated multi-step plan and I do too, then, some different interesting things. But if chaos is happening, then I can move faster and I can deploy more force to the right moment at the right time than you can. And those are the fundamentals. So I think you see the same thing with OpenAI, which is like, we think that on the fundamentals of like delivering the best AI at the cheapest price, we win. So chaos benefits us.
Yeah. I also think with someone like John D. Rockefeller, and I think Vanderbilt as well, at least John D., he really loved having a competent enemy and like a competent opponent. There was one of the letters in that book was him talking about how one of his opponents had just died, and he was like, this was one of the good ones, right? This was one where I actually had to think, and he countered all these different decisions that I was trying to make, right. And it was, it made me angry, but I was excited and loved to fight. And I think with that in particular, first he tries to like buy the other guy's company, won't sell. Then he tries to buy the railroad to not allow them to, ship their oil to New York, gets through, tries to buy all the land next to the railroad, to stop it and all these. And then he like tries to buy the politicians to basically eliminate it. And then eventually he like figures out how to cripple them. And, over the course of like 3 years, I think it was.
Yeah.
And then eventually he does sell. And he's like, but this guy actually fought.
Yeah. I mean, this is something Nietzsche talks about, is like never debase yourself by having an enemy that's below you. Right. You should always, he says that there's this tight connection between enemies and friends. No one can be your friend that isn't capable of being your enemy.
Because they're not a peer.
Because they're not a peer, right? And you debase yourself anytime that you make someone an enemy of yours who's not a peer. And I think like founders would do well to remember that. I think far too many companies try to make enemies of companies that like really are below them.
Do you have an example of that?
Well, I think like the counter example is easier, right? Which is like, think of a great brand in any domain, okay? Who is the enemy of In-N-Out? Like McDonald's, no one's the enemy of In-N-Out, right? Because McDonald's is like not worthy to be their enemy,
Maybe Chick-fil-A or Raising Cane's.
Right. And those are more opponents, right? You wouldn't think of them as like real, true enemies. So I
wouldn't even. Yeah, I think that's right. Simply because like people don't want to eat burgers every day or chicken every day,
right?
And so it's a little bit of a like exactly what you're getting when you go there, and it's there's like a locked customer experience, and they only want a certain amount of that,
right? And so I think anytime a company becomes overly fixated on their enemies, it's probably a sign of decline. This is something Peter Thiel talks a lot about in 0 to 1. Because he, his whole thing in 0 to 1 is like, don't compete. Just have a monopoly, focus on your monopoly. And he talks about how we were so focused on not competing at PayPal that when we did get an enemy that was worthy of us, which was X, which is Elon Musk, we engaged in like a 6-month like battle to the death. Both of us were willing to like kill each other and ourselves in order to beat the competition. And it just took that little spurt of competition to realize like, oh no, this is an opponent that's worthy of us. So let's merge, because otherwise like there's like a real warrior ethos, right? Like we are actually going to kill each other in this competition. And so let's merge and be successful together.
Who do you think are the founders today that most align with like the greats of the past?
Well, Elon, I think Elon is the only person who is, if you ask the question, who's going to be remembered 500 years from now, like one of the facts that I love is that Caesar essentially founds the Roman Empire, right? And emperor is actually not really a title at first. And the emperors actually are not known generally as emperors. They often take the title of Augustus or of Caesar, which then morphs into Kaiser in Germany, into czar in the Slavic countries. And there is a czar. I think the last czar is Bulgarian, the Tsar of Bulgaria, and he gets deposed in like 1937. The last czar.
It's like over 1,000 years later.
So it's almost 2,000 years that the name Caesar is synonymous with king, with rulership. All right. So it's 2,000, and of course we're long ways from forgetting Caesar. Okay, that's 2,000 years that his name is synonymous with power. All right, so you ask yourself, in 2,000 years, who is going to be remembered still? And like, there are so many unbelievably successful, wealthy people from 2,000 years ago that just no one remembers. So who's going to be remembered 2,000 years from now? That's a very high bar. And I think like Donald Trump and Elon Musk are two of the only people who are even holding a lottery ticket, who even have a chance. I guess Sam Altman. I don't really believe that. I don't really buy that, but maybe.
Why would you think no?
I think the LLMs probably will reach a plateau. But again, I will just say this: he's holding a lottery ticket. Maybe they don't. Right. And maybe Sam Altman becomes one of those guys.
My hunch would be the reason that Elon is remembered is probably because he makes life multiplanetary. Like that's probably like the pinnacle of remembrance.
Right. If that happens, then then yes, I mean, that's going to go down in the books, right? As one of the great accomplishments of humanity. But generally, beyond founding a nation or an empire, or a new way of life, a new religion, founders of companies are generally not remembered for thousands of years. So Elon, because of the uniqueness of what he's attempting, I guess it's possible, but that's why it's very few people that I think are likely to remembered that way.
I think over time, attention spans and everything are shortening and shrinking. And I think probably what that means is eventually people think less about like legacy and what they're going to be remembered by and building something enduring, and more of even like MrBeast, like his content. I don't believe a given MrBeast video will be watched 150 years from now. I think it has like cultural zeitgeist, you know, like especially a short, he'll create something that's relevant for right now, and then in 3 weeks it's like not relevant anymore.
Have you heard of the Lindy Effect?
Go for it.
It's basically is this cafe and these economists are talking, and like if you look at fruit is anti-Lindy. Okay, so if you go to a supermarket and you say, how long is fruit likely to be in the supermarket? It is how new is it, right? The newest fruit is going to be there the longest. But if you actually go and look at Broadway plays, is what they look at, that is Lindy. It's the opposite. So you can guess how long something is likely to be on Broadway by how long it has been on Broadway. So
same with like the Bible, it'll probably still be relevant.
Exactly. Like people will still be reading the Bible 2,000 years from now, right? And like what are some of the Broadway plays that have been there for, like Phantom of the Opera is probably Hamilton is a good counterexample of something that's newer but might be around for a while. But Oklahoma, Phantom of the Opera is actually not that new either. But some of these like old great Broadway plays are probably going to be around for a long, long time. And stuff that's newer, it's just less likely that it's going to be around for a long time. So I do think you're seeing this great bifurcation of more content that is like, I mean, look at TikToks or Instagram Reels, right? These are things that blow up, are seen by
100 million people,
potentially billions of people. And then I can remind you of it a month later and you're like, oh yeah, I forgot about that. You know, I forgot about that viral moment. Anything that was seen by 100 million people 80 years ago was like not forgotten about for decades and decades and decades, right? So you have this whole creation of this new category of things that are seen by hundreds of millions of people, but are ephemeral. Like that just did not exist as a category. But you still have the things that are Lindy. You still have the things that are going to last for generations. I think potentially the creation of those things is more difficult than ever, but it's not going away, I don't think.
You had to think like throughout history, what have been the biggest moments where one of these like great people took a very big short-term loss in order to kind of like achieve a much broader like long-term gain?
I mean, to me, the great example of this is Julius Caesar. And it was like the ultimate loss, right? It was the loss of his life, because this is someone who said, I am not going to take the short-term gain that everyone has taken before me of just wiping out my enemies and securing complete control of Rome. I'm going to try to grant them clemency, try and grant them forgiveness in order to ensure the long-term good of the Roman state. And Rome had been through so many purges. You know, the aristocracy of Rome were the only people that were capable of running sort of the machinery of state. And it was greatly weakened by the time that Caesar came along. It's greatly weakened even further by his successor, Augustus, because he does go through, you know, further purges. But I think that like Julius Caesar, by granting clemency in that one pivotal moment, allows Rome to survive with enough of an aristocracy, enough senators to keep running the machinery of state, that allows Rome to become Rome. You know, go look at the United States Capitol. Look at the fasces on either side of the rostra. Look at the columns in front of the Supreme Court. Like, we're just LARPing Rome. That is what the United States is. We've been LARPing Rome for 2,000 years
not
now.
our like money.
You look at our money. People are going to be LARPing Rome for 2,000 years from now. So he creates this eternal thing by sacrificing his own life, by being willing to sacrifice these short-term gains for the Roman state. To me, that's like the ultimate example of short-term sacrifice for a long-term accomplishment. That's the first thing that comes to mind. I'm sure there are more like, relevant businessy examples. Like Carnegie was the ultimate, like, this was his whole philosophy was like trust. Actually, I'll give you one good business one, which is the Rothschilds. Okay. The Rothschilds, their whole thing was, we want to be the most trusted banking house in all of Europe. And so one of these great stories is they have this incredible intelligence network. Like, they basically have the CIA.
Faster information,
right? They have the CIA of the 1800s, not dedicated to any state. It is dedicated to the Rothschild banking house. So they have a man present on the scene at the Battle of Waterloo. And a lot of what they're doing is currency trading, is bond trading. And so their man sees Blucher's charge, sees that Napoleon is defeated, takes off immediately, hands the message. Another man crosses the channel, goes to London, delivers the message to Nathan Rothschild in London. He's got a generational money-making opportunity because he knows that the British pound and British bonds are about to go through the roof, and that the French, I think it's the franc back then, and French bonds are about to go through the floor. Okay, generational money-making opportunity because he has the money. He knows this information before the British military. No one in London knows this information before him. It's a private message delivered straight to Nathan Rothschild. What does he do? He takes the message.
He sells all the stuff.
No. He doesn't sell anything. He goes and he takes it to Parliament, and he lets everyone else know. Why? Because they're outsiders. They're this Jewish banking family that just arrived in London a couple decades before. And so it's a generational money-making opportunity, yes, but it's also a generational opportunity to build trust and build a reputation, right? And so he forgoes the short-term money-making opportunities for the longer term. Okay, but how much money are we going to make if all the aristocracy of London feel grateful to us and are willing to bank with us and don't view us as outsiders anymore and view us as a legitimate part of British aristocracy? And so he forgoes the short-term money-making opportunity for the long-term trust-building opportunity. And of course, that pays off very, very handsomely over the next 50. I mean, it's the greatest run of money-making of any financial institution probably in human history.
Does anyone else, like, I know like JP Morgan, I think may have held a similar weight where he kind of like supported New York and a few other like major events throughout, I think like the 19th, 20th century. Is there anyone else that basically just optimized for like extreme reputation at the expense of short-term money making?
Yeah, I think like that was a major theme of the 19th century, frankly, of like a lot of these people was, and there's different ways to build your reputation, right? So you talk about someone like Vanderbilt, and it's reputation in a different way. It's like if you cross me, it might take years. It might take, but I will die before I will let anyone wrong me without it going avenged, right? Whereas you look at someone who, like Andrew Carnegie, and Carnegie could be tough in his own way, but it was a much friendlier reputation built on cooperation and trust. Rockefeller is interesting because he's actually probably more like Vanderbilt than he is like Carnegie, but it's like he had the Vanderbilt with the Carnegie veneer. He seemed on the exterior very placid, very Christian.
He never raised his voice,
but he was a stone cold killer on the inside. But anyway, the thing that they all had in common is that they were building a reputation.
Yeah, because I know Warren Buffett basically took, and like Charlie Munger said this, that he basically just took Johnny Rockefeller and tried to copy as much as he could into Berkshire Hathaway. I think the only thing that he really meaningfully changed was he just wanted to use less leverage to like minimize the likelihood of blow up. And I think they said, like both of them have said, that Berkshire Hathaway could be like multiple times bigger if they had just used slightly more leverage.
Right.
over the course of the history.
Right. Well, and I think in a business sense, you can see it. I think that like Southwest Airlines is probably not going to be a company 30 years from now. Because the thing about Southwest Airlines is it always the cheapest flight on every route? No, not necessarily. And in the past, maybe at certain time, but like the thing is, you went to southwest.com and you knew that there was a company that was always trying to give me the cheapest flight possible with a sufficiently good customer experience, right? Like experience can be okay enough. And this company is always working their hardest to make sure that the cost is going to be as low as possible to me. And then they get bought by private. They have this, I won't go through the whole history of Southwest, but basically they have a big disaster. They have to reconfigure all their systems. They get bought by.
Wasn't this like recently, a couple of years ago?
Just in the last few years. Big minority stake bought by private equity. And now they're trying to make them get away from select your own seating. And it's like, they just don't have a reputation once you take away this idea that they are doing everything possible to give me the lowest cost flight that they can. And once like that reputation is built over decades.
It's the 5 minutes to ruin it situation.
I just no longer have that feeling. I go to southwest.com. I no longer have the feeling that this is a company that is doing everything that they can to get me the lowest cost flight that is possible. And so just like once you lose that feeling, you lose everything. And so I think that's a good example of like something that is built and then is destroyed very quickly. And I think we're going to see the consequences of that very soon.
I think this is a little bit similar to the whole scale economy shared idea, where you basically have a company whose main objective is to get as big as possible so that they can just have the best customer experience, lowest possible prices across like a broad array of, like Costco's the best and Amazon's the best example of this, where over time they had lots of opportunities to kind of like, gouge their customers on a specific item, whether it be like jeans or something, where I think like one time they got a shipment of jeans and they could have priced it. It was like 1/4 or something, the normal price. And they were like, oh, well, we could just this once, we could have a 60% margin on these jeans instead of 15%.
Right.
And the CEO was like, no, because that sets the wrong precedent and we'll do it again.
Right. Well, this is one of the things I like to think about a lot is selective irrationality.
Mm-hmm.
Because, the famous quote from Jim Senegal, they're talking in a board meeting. They're like, hey, we just cannot keep the hot dog and soda at $1.50. Like, come on. And we could, like, we could triple the price and it'd still be the best deal in America. And he says, if you raise the price on the effing hot dog,
I'll come back and kill you. If I'm dead, I'll come back and kill you.
And it's just like, it's irrational. It's totally irrational, right? But that's what a reputation, that's what a brand is built on, is, of course, at any given time, it's rational to cheat just a little bit on this reputation.
If you're looking at like a given like specific unit of time,
exactly.
Or even
if you
like
take it within its limited context, then it's irrational to make this decision. So in order to build a brand, you have to be able to be irrational in a narrow time frame. In order to, of course, over the long term, it's rational to build a brand and build this great reputation. But all of these great founders, all of these great generals, like anyone who's great in any domain, one of the things I knew a guy who was this Stanford trained engineer who went to work for Apple, and he said, I said, oh, why'd you leave? It was a big military. He's working on nuclear technology. Like, why would you want to leave cooled nuclear technology to go work on Apple computers? And he said, it's the insides. It's the you crack open a Mac, and
like people cared.
People really cared.
It's the whole Steve Jobs
so
thing.
rare as an engineer to find that, of like, I really care about it's not just the bottom line. I really care about this product for its own sake,
like its beauty and
its
function.
beauty and its function. And it's irrational to care about the way it looks on the inside is something that no one will ever see, but they cared, right? That was a selectively irrational decision. But of course, that's what a brand is built on. It's
a little bit like the Jeff Bezosism, where he says on a long enough time horizon, both the interests of investors and customers are like aligned, because over time you can kind of build a reputation with the customer so that they, again, like you said, just trust you implicitly, and they don't have to go check the other price because they just know that you're going to give them the best possible price. And like with Amazon, they did things in the early days where even if some other, they could have gotten a higher price for a book or some other product. They would actually price match with their competitor or even do lower, just so that people could build that perception.
Well, and I think that's why someone like Bezos is so important. Like why founder-led companies are so powerful, right? Is because once you lose that,
it's like almost impossible to get back.
Yes, exactly.
Like I don't know of a single case where it actually got back.
You basically have to take it private in order to get that back. I also struggle to think of an example, but you know, if you have a CEO that's making a decision based on the share price quarter to quarter, and you've got a board who's breathing down his neck,
and you don't have the right as kind of the same pinnacle or platform where you're the founder and you can say, I'm going to make this call. It's the whole like super voting shares where it's like I get control and you get to be along for the ride or not.
You talk about being selectively irrational. Again, it's because you're making decisions on a longer time horizon. Who was it? He had a longer, that's a Rockefeller quote. He had a more settled will and a longer time horizon than his opponents. I think that's from Titan. And you just can't have that more settled will and that longer time horizon if the market is dictating what your company does quarter to quarter. And so anytime you see these great brands being built, it's always a founder-led company or someone who comes in later and takes over the company and treats it like a founder-led company. And those are vanishingly small. It does happen from time to time, but it's very rare.
I think it's super rare for, like with Tim Cook and Apple. I'm pretty sure I saw this yesterday where every single day since Tim Cook took over in like 2011 or 2012, he's created roughly, Apple's market cap has gone up by roughly $700 million.
Yeah.
Which is insane, obviously. But I think at the same time, people don't have the same perception of Apple as they did back in the day.
No.
And I think that kind of like Steve Jobs set him up, and it's, he's a great operator and he's great at supply chain, but he's not like inventing new products.
Yeah. I mean, so Carnegie retires at age 35,
mm-hmm.
and he's done really well, but he's not one of the 300 richest people in the world. But he has basically created all the value. It's just on a time delay, right? And so he doesn't become the richest person in the world for like 3 decades later, and he's been retired all that time, right? But it's really, he created the value, and then it's just on a time delay, and then it explodes into this enormous
massive
business
behemoth.
empire. Same thing with Rockefeller. Rockefeller does extremely well, but he doesn't become the richest person in human history
until the automobile was invented.
Right. And he's been retired for a long time, but he already created the value. It's a ticking time bomb, right?
And I remember specifically with like Rockefeller, there was this moment where someone brings him the message that they've had all these monopoly laws created and people are like breaking up monopolies now. And there's this moment where he's playing golf and someone brings him the message that Standard Oil is going to be broken up.
Right.
And instead of being like angry, he just like smiled.
Yeah.
Because he's like, oh, I know I'm gonna. And then if you look fast forward, 110 years or something like that, now all of the big oil companies of today are basically just descendants of Standard Oil.
Correct.
And if he had just held his stock in all of those different businesses, he'd be like a trillionaire right now.
Yeah. Chevron is a descendant of Standard Oil. Aramco is a descendant of Standard Oil.
BP. I think Shell.
No, but Shell, they did end up buying like a minority stake. So it's like 10% of Shell. Anyway. Exxon.
And eventually it's kind of like it goes almost full circle where
Arco.
Eventually it's broken up. First it's broken up and then like years later you just see them remerging together.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that is a great moment. He's like, okay, it's too late now. Like they don't know that I already won. So you can say that it's all broken up, but yeah.
You've studied more than just like the great leaders of the past. You've also studied a bunch of really great artists. And I think art has slightly more timelessness than like companies in general and even empire building. How do you think about timelessness and how do you think like the greats of the past thought about that?
I think in a certain way, aesthetic contributions are almost the only lasting contributions. So for example, you think about someone like Steve Jobs, you don't think of as an artist, you think of as a founder. But what's his great contribution to humanity? If Steve Jobs never comes around, is the personal computer never going to emerge? Are we never going to get smartphones? It's like, no, it's not likely, right? These technological innovations are going to happen anyway. So what is the lasting contribution? The contribution is that we got them in the form that we did, and that I'm glad that Steve Jobs exists, because
Let's have beauty on the inside sort of situation.
exactly, the beauty on the inside, beauty on the outside, it's much more aesthetically pleasing than it would have been otherwise. And yeah, I also think that art has a way of inspiring humanity in certain directions, and giving humanity certain goals. And so I do think that great art has that capability. I think for that reason, great architecture is perhaps the highest form of art. Like, I think that the cathedral is what locks in Christianity into Europe for 1500 years.
Is
right?
it because it's almost something like I've noticed in a lot of buildings you walk in and you don't feel anything. And I think like the biggest impact that you can have on someone is just like an emotional impact. Like people don't remember sounds or voices or faces. They remember how someone made them feel.
Right. And I think the cathedral is inherently seductive for that reason, right? So much of life just makes you feel nothing, right? And then you walk into St. Peter's or St. Paul's or the Cathedral of Cologne, and you're just overwhelmed, right? And so yeah, I think that art has the ability to last much longer. I mean, there's this great quote of Carl Sagan. We're launching the first satellite that is going to go outside the solar system. And so they want to include different things that are representative of humanity. So if any alien life form finds this, they'll know like what we were all about, right? And so this one physicist says, well, maybe we should include the music of Johann Sebastian Bach. He says, but then again, that would be showing off, right? And I think that Bach is going to be listened to for hundreds or even thousands of years from now. So yeah, I do think it's much more lasting than almost any other contribution to humanity.
One of the biggest things that is in my mind is like, how can I make the thing that I'm creating be timeless? And for any normal business, you want to make investments early so that you like create an amazing product, and then only then do you actually like go out to the market and try to sell it. You don't like create you don't try to sell like a bad chicken sandwich before it's baked.
Right.
And I think like very few people genuinely take the time and thought required to make something that will last, or what gives it the best likelihood of lasting. And like even if you look at many of the VC funds today, they all have a podcast, but the podcast it's the same four walls. It's the same mics, it's the same cameras, it's the same people, same questions, same format. Part of what I'm trying to do is like, if you're going to go interview Elon, you shouldn't be doing it over Zoom. You should be like going out to what makes him special.
Well, and I think that's one of the reasons that I do what I do is you look at some of those, like what stories have stood the test of time. Okay. Well, what are the first stories that we have that have survived? It's Gilgamesh. It's the Iliad. It's the Odyssey.
Like David and Goliath, maybe?
David and Goliath, right? Moses. It's a great biography that has always captured our attention. And it has always been the rocket fuel that has inspired human achievement. It's
like, just amazing story.
Like one of my favorite stories of all time is Thomas Edison. He's a telegraph operator. He's doing well, kind of like a young tech bro. He's like 22 years old, I want to say. He's doing well, but
he hasn't gone deaf yet.
He hasn't. He actually started going deaf very young. He has started going deaf a little bit, but young, accomplished, but no one special. And he's traveling around with these other telegraph operators. They go from station to station around the Midwest. And he and his roommate get home one night, and Edison starts reading this biography of Michael Faraday. The roommate goes to bed. He wakes up in the morning. He finds Edison still in the kitchen, has not gone to bed. He's still reading this biography of Faraday. He throws it down in disgust and says, I'm already 22. I may live to be 60. Can I accomplish as much as he did? I am going to hustle. And it's that rocket fuel of reading about a great inventor from the previous generation and that he feels Aristotle defines it, calls it zeal, and says it's the feeling that a man has when he sees present in others great virtues that he is capable of possessing but does not. And so it's that emotion, right? It's the emotion that Caesar felt when we saw the statue of Alexander. It's the emotion that Steve Jobs had when he thought about Edwin Land, right? That emotion is what has spurred great artists, great founders, great financiers, great conquerors through all generations. And that's, Plutarch's Lives has been inspiring people now for almost 2,000 years. Epic of Gilgamesh, the Iliad for 5,000 years, whatever. So I think it's going to be much of the same. And that's what I'm trying to inspire with How to Take Over the World is people. It's a new format, but it's really the same content. And I think that is what is going to inspire people for the next 10, 100 million years, is going to be that same stuff.
There's this idea that you are kind of like the 5 people that you surround yourself with. And I think like only recently, especially like you go back to Andrew Carnegie, he was super lucky in that he figured out, I think as a teenager, he went and wrote the notes for some rich person, and this rich person had a library, and later on in life he ended up building a bunch of libraries to kind of like commoditize knowledge or let people give themselves an advantage if they wanted it. But back then he started reading super early, read through this entire library, and he kind of built this mental model of his world and like the people that he looked up to and what he was kind of going after. I think personally for my life, I've kind of tried to find the people. You look and you say, if you want to become the richest person in the world or build a great company, you probably shouldn't go to college. You probably shouldn't like study from the person that's saying, here's how to do it. You should probably just go study the person that has actually done it.
I think what's so powerful about that is the single most destructive thing to motivation and to great accomplishment is uncertainty.
Mm-hmm.
And that's one of the things you see about great leaders. I was just reviewing my episode of Shackleton because I'm going to re-release it, Ernest Shackleton. And he says one of the most important things is to create a new plan straight away when an old one goes to ruin.
Shit.
Yeah, because that was happening all the time for him, right? He's trying to go to Antarctica and the plan goes to crap because they get trapped in the ice. Okay, well, great. We're going to wait for the ice to thaw. So everyone like feels calm, feels good. And so let's just survive on the ship. Okay. The ice starts crushing the ship. Okay. We got a new plan. And like immediately comes up with a new plan. And it's like every plan goes to shit 5 or 6 times. But everyone stays together, stays motivated, does what they need to do because every single time he comes up with a new plan. And when you find a great historical figure that you want to be like, you've got the plan. And all that's left is the work.
Just execution,
right? It's so clarifying. And so that's why it motivates. Like once you're Caesar and you know you want to be Alexander, once you're Steve Jobs, you know you want to be Edwin Land. Once you are Rockefeller and you know you want to be Amos Lawrence, all that's left is the work, right? And so once all that's left is the work, once the uncertainty is removed, achievement is so much easier.
Generally, when you're talking with like an employee of a company, you shouldn't have a huge amount of uncertainty. Generally people don't want to live with uncertainty.
Right.
But from what I can tell, like the best founders in the world, the best like world conquerors, they constantly live with uncertainty, and they just kind of like feed on it.
Right.
And they're willing to kind of go out on a limb, even with, you say like Walt Disney or MrBeast, spending all the money, reinvesting all the dollars. Like MrBeast, at one point, his mom's crying on the phone with him because she's like, she had hid $10,000 in some bank account. And he was like, oh, well, I just heard, that there's this extra $10,000. I'm going to take that money and spend it on the next video. And she's
Right.
like, why won't you just like keep a little bit off to the side just in case?
Right.
And he's like, no, I'm not going to do that. Do you think that the best people that are those types of builders have an unusual ability to live with uncertainty and be willing to take that type of risk?
Yeah. I mean, I think people get such bad advice now when people say great leaders are vulnerable and open up to their subordinates. It's like, no, dude. As a leader, it is literally your job to like take doubt and uncertainty and fear and just eat it.
Internalize it, but
Like,
not show it.
Yeah, exactly. Like that is what any great project, but especially entrepreneurship is, right? It's like, what's Winston Churchill's quote? Victory is going from failure to failure with no loss of enthusiasm, right? Like, hopefully not, actually. Hopefully you do have success at some point, but like, maybe not from failure to failure, but from like uncertainty to uncertainty, from problem to problem, right? And Steve Jobs says that the founder, their job is to be the reiterator of the vision, because stuff just comes up, and when stuff comes up, the natural human instinct is what Mike Tyson said. Everyone has a plan until you get punched in the face,
yeah.
right? And so you get punched in the face, and now all of a sudden you're in survival mode, right? And you just take the short-term view, and you're just dealing with whatever is in front of your face. But as the founder, you're saying, no, this is remember the vision, remember the vision, remember the vision, remember the vision. And so as problems arise, as uncertainties arise, you have to be the one who says, no, like, we're going forward. This is the plan. This is the plan. This is the plan. And then everyone can march to the beat of that tune. So you provide certainty in an uncertain world. That is like the number one job of a leader.
I'm pretty sure it was Caesar. At one point, he like goes to, and he just like takes out a ridiculous amount of debt and makes it so he's like almost too big to fail. Do you have any other examples of people kind of doing that and being willing to just take an unimaginable amount of risk, put their basically personal livelihood on the line in order to pull something off?
Yeah. So Caesar very famously does, like, he, it's
like, I think in the equivalent, it's like $500 million in debt or some ridiculous, but personal debt.
Yeah. And he just keeps, because that's what everyone did essentially in Rome, right? Which is, I take on some debt, and then I win the consulship or whatever, elected office, and then I go get a governorship. And once I'm a governor, then basically I just screw over everyone in my governorship and take all their money and then pay off all my debts and get fabulously wealthy. Anyway.
There's a playbook.
And Caesar's doing that playbook, but he's just doing it on a scale that no one has ever done it before.
Countrywide.
Right? Yeah. I mean, it's just unbelievable. And then what does he do? He executes the playbook. He goes to Gaul, and he just executes on a scale that no one has ever seen before. So he goes from the most in debt man that Rome has ever seen to the wealthiest man that Rome has,
maybe even the entire world has ever seen.
Yeah, probably up to that point. It's certainly not like in an opulent way, like you'd see with the emperors of Persia or the Ptolemies in Egypt, but like beneath the surface, yeah. There are some estimates, people try and say who was the richest person to have ever lived. And there are some estimates by which his adopted son, Augustus Caesar, is, I think if you look at like percentage of GDP,
like global GDP.
Yeah. By some measures, he's the richest person to have ever lived. So yeah, I mean, I think like venture capital is kind of the same thing, right? But it's just turned into an industry, and it seems banal to us now. It seems normal because now we have an entire industry around it. But if you think about it, it's kind of Caesar done repetitively, right? Of like, we're going to take on all this debt. We've got all these shareholders who are expecting recompense, and there's a good chance that we just go bust and no one ever gets paid back and everyone loses their money. So I think
it's kind of amazing,
normal to us now, but it's like, it's actually such an effective tactic. It's funny, like you go read really great writing and you read something like 0 to 1 by Peter Thiel, and there's a level on which you read it and you're like, yeah. And you know why? It's because at the time it was revolutionary, and he was so right that it has become common wisdom and everyone believes it and everyone repeats it. But I think this strategy of like taking on lots of debt, delaying payoff until like a big payoff much later, is now normalized and captured in this industry of venture capital. And it seems pretty normal to us now, only because it's been vindicated and it's been successful.
There was this line from David Senra on another podcast where he basically said like the best form of Peter Thiel is basically the guy that would just repeat 0 to 1, like go into every single speech that he ever does and repeat 0 to 1. And like with him doing like an antichrist talk, it's not exactly what people want out of him. Like, and if you look at Steve Jobs or even Brian Chesky, for example, Brian Chesky's probably repeated the exact same mission, story, everything over 2,000 times is my bet, without a loss of enthusiasm for it. What are the best examples of like founders that just repeated the same mantra for like their entire lifetimes?
I mean, Bezos is a very good example, right? Of like, you look at, you know, you control F for like customer experience through his shareholder letters. And it's like, yeah. It's like, it's been a decade. You'd think people got it by now, but they don't get it.
Well, it's the whole you aren't preaching to like a standing army. You're preaching to like a moving parade. Correct. I think is the line.
Yeah. You know, one of the things of every great leader, of every great communicator, is the ability to just reiterate past the point where, yeah, like, look, if you've got someone who's locked in, who's listening to every single thing that you're saying, they are bored and they are saying, do you have to keep repeating this? But the answer is yes, I do, because there's a fresh audience and human nature is so fickle. People forget.
We're literally just forgetting machines.
Yeah,
like
exactly.
Our best, like the way it works is our brains are basically constantly trying to eliminate as much of the information as possible. And like, that's why the like emotion is so important. If you read a book and you don't feel anything, you'll just forget the entire thing pretty much.
Exactly. And I think too, there's like such a thing as, you need to hold multiple lessons in your mind at the same time. You know what I mean? And so, there's such a thing as learning a lesson too well, which I think the United States is constantly going through a process.
How do you mean?
So for example, the United States gets really fed up with the so-called tyranny of King George III, not happy with it, not pleased with it. And so we come up with a system, we win our independence, and we come up with a system called the Articles of Confederation, which is completely anti-monarchical, right? And has no central control whatsoever. And then you get Shays' Rebellion, you get, you know, all these problems that come from having essentially no one in charge.
And I think the only reason that we got that was because like, wasn't George Washington offered multiple times, like, you know, here you can have this title, and he just refused it again and again.
So it's a little more complicated, but George Washington certainly could have made himself king, monarch, if he had wanted to. Hamilton actually proposes making him king. But anyways, so we get the Articles of Confederation. It's just chaos. We learned the lesson too well, right? Of anti-tyranny. Mm-hmm. So then we go in the other direction and we say, okay, well, now we need a strong presidency. We need a strong central government. So we adopt the Constitution. And you have a very strong president in George Washington, really kind of run by Alexander Hamilton. And you have very quickly the adoption of this very strong central government. Okay. Well, then we kind of learn that lesson, and then maybe they go a little too far. So then you come in, you get Thomas Jefferson as the third president. Anyways, it's just like vacillating back and forth, right? And I think now for a very long time, you haven't really had a president who's in control of the United States government for
functionally like non-dictatorship for 300 years.
Well, FDR was essentially a dictator. That was 80 years ago. That was the last president who was truly in charge of the government of the United States. And so, so I think we learned that lesson a little too well. And now we're once again waiting on someone who can be in charge again and cut through some of this red tape and get things done.
The way I think about it is like, I think almost the optimal form of the world is you have the government is not a dictatorship, but then you have on a small scale, like individual companies are dictatorships. And I think a lot of people, especially in government today in the US, are like, they see Elon and they see that he basically has dictatorial power over his companies. And they're like, this is somehow wrong. Like shareholders should have more of a say or something like this. And if you actually look, there's nothing great created by committee, right? Like almost anywhere. Right. Which means that you have to have, like on a small scale, you have to have dictatorships on a company scale. And then over time, I think like throughout civilizations, you basically have the rise and fall of civilizations by slowly building up that regulation. And over time, it just eventually collapses in on itself because it can't function.
Yeah, I think there's a great mistake. I mean, I think thinking about government types is very exciting, right? And um, there's this temptation, which is if we could just get it just right,
Yeah.
then
If
it'll
human
last
incentives,
forever.
yeah, if human incentives weren't the way that they are, and like if everyone wasn't corrupt and all these different things,
And
if there was peace.
The United States Constitution has been so successful that people are like, we as Americans have this obsession with like, what does the Constitution really mean? What is actually constitutional? If we just get it just right, then everything will be good and everything will last forever. And I think that government, the form of government, perhaps matters far less than we would like to think. We're so proud of our Constitution. It's like, hey, how's Canada done with still having a monarchy? It's like, oh, basically the same as the United States. It's like, oh, okay. Well, then maybe our form of governments were actually not so important.
I think the only thing that like Canada has and a lot of these other countries have really failed on is like if you look at the total new like companies and real value and like innovation that's coming out of these places, it's just not. If you look at like, I think the top something like 10 companies in the entire world have all come out of one place, which is San Francisco. And then if you go outside of that, it's just super sparse.
Yeah, but I don't think that a constitutional monarchy is the reason. I think you'd be hard pressed considering the market size that the United States has that Canada does not. It would be very difficult to have recreated that in Canada anyway. I don't think that the Canadians were a constitution away from having Toronto be San Francisco or New York. Yeah,
I wouldn't necessarily say constitution. I would say they probably. Like, I think if you try to not let people not necessarily get rich, but have the latitude to just go down an unconventional path.
I mean, I think Canada has been a very successful country. You look at, I mean, they have created some great companies. Alexander Graham Bell, like one of the great inventors of all time, great standard of living, essentially equivalent to the United States. I think Canada has been extremely successful. And I think it's a great counterexample, a great counterbalance before we say as Americans, our government has been so good and has enabled all this. It's like, no, actually, if you put a bunch of Anglos with a bunch of empty land in a new continent, they're kind of like beavers. Like they build the same thing kind of no matter what. It takes a lot to divert them and create something new. Now, the counterexample, of course, is Korea, where it's like you literally have a line dividing the exact same people, give them one form of government up north, give them a different form of government down south, outcomes are completely different. So like
you just go fast forward like 80 years.
I actually think it's much easier to mess up with a bad government. It's like the whole nature nurture question, right? It's like, is human achievement more nature or more nurture? It's like, well, that's completely variable, right? If I had dropped you on your head as a 6-month-old, then your outcomes would be 100% nurture, but in optimal circumstances, then it's all nature, right? Like, if you have 100% of your needs met in exactly the way they should be, then your outcomes are just going to be what they are based on who you are, right? And it's much easier to mess up than it is to like push someone to a new level. So, I think that's true on like an individual level. As a parent, I think much more about like not messing up my children than I do about like optimizing their performance. And I think it's true at a societal and organizational level as well.
When I look at the like great people of the past, I think people used to be like Vanderbilt, for example. He at one point has someone confiscate some of his ships as they were like coming back, I think, through the Panama Canal, I believe.
Yeah.
And at first he, asked for them back. The guy doesn't give them back. Then he, I think, like tries to pay for them or something. Again, doesn't give them back. Then he goes to the U.S. government and he says, you guys need to step in here and get my ships back. They don't step in. They say they don't care. Then he goes down there and just kills them. Kills the guy. And then I like fast forward to today, and I feel like there's way fewer like entrepreneurs that are willing to kind of go outside the lines. But like if you look at go in the gray area, if you look at like a Travis Kalanick, though, he at one point during Uber's growth builds like Operation Grayball, where that he knows that the city governments, like local governments, are going to fight the adoption of Uber, And so what he does is he basically creates a database of all of the local government employees, and then doesn't allow, creates a fake phantom app which doesn't allow them to use the platform. It pretends that rides are coming, and then they just disappear, and it's like, where'd the ride go? And he kind of like is able to skirt a little bit of regulation, a little bit of a law, a lawfare almost.
Well, and so you say this happens less, and I think probably that's true, but also people are incentivized to not talk about it at the time. Right. So at the time, Vanderbilt is not trumpeting like, hey,
it's only
I'm buying congressmen, I'm killing people, I'm doing X, I'm doing Y, I'm doing Z, right? And so it's only after the fact that you maybe realize everything that was happening.
Do you think that there are still founders of
Definitely.
Vanderbilt's quality kind of going to those lengths?
No, but I think that there are more things happening in that direction than that we know about as it's happening. But no, I mean, people are just less tough now than they were back then, more precious about life and the loss of life. So yeah, I think there's probably less happening than there was at Vanderbilt's time, but there's also more happening than we know about at any given time.
Yeah, I kind of imagine that like Elon is kind of the almost perfect or semi-perfect best we have embodiment of what one of those types would have been like, where he basically just figures out, here's the actual inputs, even like him not liking George Soros. I'm pretty sure George Soros realizes at some point that the most optimal way to control like the government and power is not through just buying politicians, but it's like buying local, I think, judges
and DAs. Yeah. George Soros, I think more people should study George Soros. He's done a remarkable job of, I think it's been very destructive, but it's been remarkably successful in achieving what he's wanted to.
Do you want to go down? Like, I haven't studied him a huge amount.
I haven't studied him as much as I would like to. I would like to study George Soros more.
Because I imagine that like even he's like most famous for cracking the British pound and making like $1 billion in a day. But I think his like larger impact is honestly political.
Yeah,
probably.
I think that's true. And I think, look, I'll say this about George Soros. I think he's been incredibly destructive, but at the same time, if I had like personally lived through the Holocaust, I think I would, I think once you realize like what he has lived through, I think his viewpoint becomes much more understandable. Right. And I think more people should endeavor to at least like understand where he comes from and why he feels the way he does.
If you had to think about like a single trait or quality of the like prior greats that to date most people haven't adopted, like the best entrepreneurs of today haven't adopted, what is that trait or quality?
The greatest resource lack that we have in the world is not energy, is not carbon, is not oil, it's vision.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that there is a tremendous lack of vision in the world, and there's never been less vision because it's so easy to be distracted. And I think a lot of great vision comes from these moments of just longing that often comes during boredom. And we're never bored anymore, And so,
if anything, we're bored of overstimulation.
Yeah, exactly. Right. And I think you see this like great irony of modernity is like, we have never had a less, like, look at movies today. Go watch a movie from like the 80s and they're so sexual. Like you're kind of amazed at like the amount of sex that was in these movies. And like, we have the most sterile, least sexual, least sensual, least erotic generation. And it's why? It's because we're flooded by pornography. And so like the just volume of actual like explicit sexual content, you go like, it's so ridiculous to lead someone from the 1800s who's like, ooh, if women start showing their shoulders or their ankles, men won't be able to control themselves. And it's like, yeah, I wish I could just get turned on by just seeing a woman's shoulders, right? Like in some ways, that generation was so much more sexually potent than our own.
Then Kanye West coming out with his girlfriend going full naked, nude, or right? Sydney Sweeney now.
And it's the same thing. So that like, that's a good example of just like on a sexual level, but you can also look at it on like an artistic level or on just like a day-to-day vision, yearning level, like there's so many ways to cheaply satisfy all these human motivations that we no longer have these great visions for projects that take decades or hundreds or thousands of years. And I think that's what humanity needs to recover. And one of the things that makes Elon so special is, look, he's probably not going to get to Mars in his lifetime.
You really think so?
I think he will not.
Like personally or with SpaceX? Like, do you think that he's going to send a rocket to Mars and
he might get a rocket to Mars, right? But I don't think that a self-sustaining Mars colony will be achieved during his lifetime. But he is setting a mark for humanity that I do think will outlive him, and I think he will start. I think he will start the process that could result in something like that. So there is someone with a vision that is going to take decades or hundreds of years to achieve, and he's like the only one that is thinking in that sort of way. And I think we need more of it.
In Elon's case in particular, he has had, I don't know, like when people think of Elon today, they think of this like unstoppable person that basically just has conquered like everything that he's kind of set out to conquer. And he's not necessarily faultless, but he's able to play 60 chess in a way that no one else can. When I look back at like him in the past, it's at many moments during even Tesla and SpaceX and all these other companies that he started, there was like so many moments where he almost went bankrupt and he kept chewing the glass. And there was like this very specific moment in a board meeting, I believe, with Tesla in 2008 or 9, where he's in the room and he just like, he pretends that he has money that he doesn't have. And I believe that he's trying to raise like 40 million at like a $200 million valuation into Tesla. And if he doesn't have this money, they're going bankrupt in 3 days. They can't make payroll.
Right.
And he pretends, he has all of his money outlaid and he says, oh, fuck it. I'll just, all these investors are saying they don't want to invest. And he says, I'll just do the entire round myself. And in this moment, like the room changes and suddenly all the investors are like, oh, well, if it's going to survive, then we want to be invested.
Right.
And we want to put money in.
There's a great quote from Phil Knight in Shoe Dog, where he's talking about all these attempted careers he's had where he's like been okay. And then he's just this incredible founder as the founder of Nike, and everything he touches turns to gold, right? And he said, what's the difference? And he says, belief. I decided belief is irresistible. And it's true. Like someone with genuine, sincere belief, it is genuinely irresistible. And every company goes through that, there's another good quote from Steve Jobs talking about Pixar. Because Pixar starts as a hardware company, and then
I think at first he like put in a couple $1 million, and then like over the course of the next couple years prior to Toy Story, that he just keeps on pouring in cash. Totally. And at one point, I think he put in almost like all of his money into Pixar.
And it's not like it's going like closer and closer to success. Like, no, it's just like
it's like failing. A binary out. Yeah, he just keeps on losing the money. And there's so many moments where like nothing is happening. He's put in all this cash, right, and there's not even like a light at the end of the tunnel.
And so actually, I can't remember if the quote was from him or from Ed Catmull, who was the actual founder of Pixar. But what he says about it is, we all got depressed, but not at the same time.
Yeah.
So it's like in the founding team, everyone is like, we are so screwed. There's no way. But at any given time, there's like this core founding group of 4 or 5 people. At any given time, there's like one person who sees the light, who's like, no, we can make it, right? So there's one person who believes. And I think there are certain people, I think, who can just like chew glass day after day, brute force their way through. But for most people, I think it's really important to have that team who all really believe in the vision and the mission. Because at any given time, like, yeah, you're going to have moments where you're like, I don't know. At least that, like, from studying all these stories, that's like basically always the case, right? Of like even Phil Knight, who says that belief is irresistible. Yeah, there are moments where he's like, I just don't see a way through that we're going to make this.
One of the reasons why I'm so fascinated by like MrBeast is at one point, like one of his big breaks is just, I think he just said Logan Paul 100,000 times in a row over the course of something like 32 to 36 hours. And that was like the lengths that he was willing to go to just keep on going.
Yeah.
And I guess at that point, because it was the first time that anyone had ever done that, people are like, this guy's so stupid and this is so dumb that we have to click and share.
Yeah.
For most co-founding teams, the way I think about it is like most of the time, if there is a co-founder, it will be the real founder is the person where if the company, if they leave, the company doesn't happen. And then the other person is if if the other person leaves, and the company doesn't happen, then they're just like a strong early believer.
Right.
And for the people that have the like capacity, because I don't think there's a co-founder of MrBeast, right? For the people that have the capacity to do that, what do you think makes them different?
A lack of optionality.
What
You know,
do you mean by that?
You speak specifically of MrBeast, and he said, "I'm going to be a YouTuber," and he talks about this. He's like, and maybe I'll never make it, and if that's the case, then I will die at 90 years old, and I will have been a YouTuber, and I will have never made money. And I'm trying for the rest of my life. This is what I'm doing, and I'm either going to make it or I'm going to die trying. Just no optionality there. Like, this is going to succeed.
He said a binary outcome where he's kind of like let live or die. He's doing it.
And I think you see that with Walt Disney, with Elon Musk, with these people who like really have to carry the entire vision on their shoulders, is just either because of an extreme desire or just something that happened in their past for whatever reason. Like,
it almost
there's no option B.
Feels very Bill Gates to me, where he's basically like, I think in the early days of Microsoft, he would do these sprints where he would code or just grind for, I don't know, 2-3 days straight without sleep, without eating. And then at some point he would just crash for 20 hours and then wake up and like repeat the process. And he did this for years, building Microsoft. And I don't know very many people that are that way today.
Yeah. I think for the vast majority of people, you have to be careful with advice, right? Because for the vast majority of people, like Steve Jobs, I think of as that type of person, right? And even Steve Jobs is saying about Pixar, we'd all give up hope, just not at the same time. Like, even he needed that team of like, okay, I might not believe right now, but there's someone here who does. So I think for the vast, vast majority of people, it's good to surround yourself with believers.
Yeah, I think that's 100% correct. I think a lot of people get it wrong where they're like, you have to have a co-founder. And I think the right model is you basically have to find early employees, like a couple basically people that are going to follow Jesus almost.
Right.
And even if Jesus doesn't feel good that day, they're still going to keep the momentum. Like Sam Altman has this line where he's like, momentum is the lifeblood of startups. Right. And I think like with any movement or anything like that, it's the same thing.
Right. Even Jesus says, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? Right. Like, even he's got his 12 apostles. Right. So
at one point, even he's like, fuck.
Yeah. It's good to have believers around you. Yeah.
What else do you want to cover?
I've been thinking a lot about Shackleton because I've been doing this episode on.
What are you thinking about Shackleton?
I think the thing that I think about with Shackleton is like, what do you want to spend the rest of your life doing? Like, are you going to win by winning, if that makes sense? Because he wins by losing. He has one of the most famous stories of all time. He inspires everyone and he fails. Like, that is the story that everyone points to, is like this ship, the Endurance, tries to cross Antarctica and doesn't. Right?
Constantly.
But they just survive, right? And it's like, have you chosen something for your life that you believe in so much, that you enjoy so much, that you will be glad that you attempted it, even if you fail? And I think I have found something like that in my life, where it's like, you know what? If How to Take Over the World never made, I really want it to. I really want to succeed. I want to inspire the next 1,000 years of human accomplishment. I want to be the next Plutarch. But if I don't, I'll be glad that I did this with my life. And
you gave it the best.
And I gave it the best. I tried, and I will have enjoyed doing it for every minute. And I hope more people can find that. I think that's rare to find that in your life.
So another thing that I've seen is very constant theme is typically, even at the start of like a great company, say Airbnb, for example, their first model of that company was Brian Chesky comes to San Francisco and he literally doesn't have enough money to pay rent the next month. And so they create the first version of Airbnb, which is just the air mattresses.
Right.
And he tries to go and pitch, like actually for the first 4 months after that first weekend where Michael Cat and Mole are staying on their bedroom floor, he and Joe Gebbia both just go off and try to find like work on other startups. And then eventually they pitch a bunch of investors. I think it was like 20 different investors. All of them turn them down. It's like $100,000 for 10% was the deal that they were offering for Airbnb. And if you look at that example, Airbnb was 4 or 5 different iterations away from a really good idea, but at the time they had a really bad idea, which is just scaling air mattresses on people's floors or even on top of the bed.
But this is something they wanted to exist in the world, irrespective of whether it's a good business or not. Like, and I do think that's true of a lot of great founders. Is like, no, Steve Jobs cared very deeply about the personal computer existing in the world and it existing in a beautiful way. And
kind of creating the bicycle for the mind.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I think like if he had never become super wealthy, like if he hadn't gone into technology, he wanted to be a novelist, right? And I think
the same thing with Palmer Luckey. If he hadn't become a tech person, he would have become a journalist.
A journalist. Yeah. I think there's some connection there.
And same with Warren Buffett, actually.
Is that right?
He was going to become a journalist.
Caesar was like one of the great prose writers of his generation. I think there's like a connection there. There's certainly connection between like great artists and great accomplishment. Winston Churchill was a very good painter. Adolf Hitler was like quite a good painter. But I do think that like to Steve Jobs, there is an equivalency between a novel and the Apple II, and you see that all the time of like people are trying to get him to make these market trade-offs and he just doesn't want to make them because he cares more about creating great art than he does about creating a great business. And ironically, that is what creates one of the greatest businesses of all time, right? Is that he's not worried about the business, he's worried about the product. So yeah, I do think there's a connection there that some of these founders have of like doing the thing that they love doing on a day-to-day basis and living a good life. But I think about the best life. If you could trade places, there's no answer I'm looking for. If you could trade places with anyone in history and like just on a day-to-day basis live their life, who do you think that would be for you?
Genuinely, I think my favorite thing would be to be the right-hand guy to John D. Rockefeller. Not be John D. Rockefeller himself, but just get to see, like, help him execute that, like building Standard Oil. I think getting, like, I try to, if I can see greatness or I can experience greatness by, like, I'm never going to watch, I don't watch, basketball, but if I could see like Michael Jordan play, I probably would.
You're right.
Same thing with like comedians or artists, things like that. And I think if you look at Warren Buffett or Bill Gates or Steve Jobs or Jeff Bezos or John D. Rockefeller, it's the same situation where you get to like see their greatness and watch the thing that they, and this is like why I'm doing what I'm doing, is I kind of want to create the next, I want to like help share the stories and the trials and tribulations of the world's greatest founders as they're building their companies.
Yeah.
And if you look at like the past, there's no great interview with Jeff Bezos. In 1994, he's packing boxes on the garage floor in Seattle. And there's no great interviews with Elon Musk as he's like pretending that there's a computer. He creates like this server stack and it's just got one little server, but then there's a whole bunch of beeps and buttons so that when the investors come into the Zip2 office, it's like, oh, this is a real business.
I think the way I would think about it that's a little differently is in every great story, for many of them, their business does end up becoming a burden to them. Now, I actually don't think that's true of Rockefeller because he's wired different, But you think about someone like Walt Disney, and early Disney just sounds like paradise. You know what I mean? It's Los Angeles when Los Angeles is like kind of just coming up, and you got all these young artists who are just like figuring out animation for the first time. And it's rambunctious. It's just like feels very liberating and free. Whereas then as the business goes on, there are labor concerns, there's profitability concerns, and there's like a sense in which his business is constraining and is a burden to him.
Like he stops doing the thing that he loves, and now he's like managing people or doing some other activity that isn't the thing that he loves.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's true of many stories, but to me, like one of the great stories of just early freedom is the Wright brothers. and they're on that beach in North Carolina, and it's the two of them, and they have a few other people pass through. It's like between 2 and 5 people at any given time, and they're just sleeping in a shed. And every morning they wake up and they're like, let's figure out how to fly. And they do. They do. Over the course of 3 successive summers, they learn how to fly. And to me, like that's what I would, if I could go anywhere, it's like the sense of accomplishment, the sense of knowing you're doing something big that's going to turn into a great business, and just like the physical sensation of flying for the first time, all that wrapped up at the same time is just like unbelievable. I mean, I would love to have been able to experience that. For many of these founders and conquerors and artists, I think there's that moment of exhilaration where it's everything is new, everything is exciting, and you don't have the burden, you don't have the expectations yet. And to me, that is like what is most exciting. And one of the things that I try and avoid is then piling myself. This is why I don't want to like overhire, have a lot of full-time employees, is because I always want to maintain that flexibility, that freedom of, I love this business. I love doing it every single day. I could light it all on fire and walk away if I wanted to, you know?
Yeah, I think about it the same way where I want to basically figure out I love interviewing founders. I hate doing editing. I don't love carrying around bags. Like I do enjoy the like the hustle and having agency and getting on the plane and all this stuff. But I don't, like there was a point at which I was carrying around so many bags so consistently that like my shoulders and my neck just started getting messed up, and the muscles, and it was causing like these muscle spasms.
Right.
And it was like these weird like body shocks. It was not good.
Yeah.
But then I kind of realized like the thing that I truly love is just interviewing people, and I don't love all these other aspects, and I can just basically find the best person in the world at one of those given areas and just systematically eliminate everything that isn't the thing that I love.
Right.
And then once you get down to that, it's like, yes, will I be here in 10 years or 20 years or 30 years? It's like, of course I will. Why won't I? I won't stop love learning about people.
Right. Who do you think, you asked me earlier who I think has the chance to be great?
Mm-hmm.
Who do you think is the next person who's going to be remembered for 500 years?
I think the biggest thing is you have to figure out, in order for that to even be a possibility, you have to figure out the right mission. And I think a lot of the people building companies now have they, for better or worse, think more, they may say that they're not like focused on the money, but then I go look at what they're making and it's like, do you really care about like this AI spreadsheet stuff, software? It's like maybe, but that's not really like world changing. And if, someone offers you $100 million to exit, you probably will.
Yeah.
I think the only people that have a shot at it are the people that are doing something that's super off the beaten path and maybe has a high risk of no one else being willing to be a believer along the path. So Isaiah Taylor from Valor Atomics, he's wanting to build like thousands of nuclear reactors. And there's just not, like, I haven't ever heard of anyone else wanting to do that. And for the first 85 plus investor pitches, they all said like, come back to me when you have a lead. And then at some point, Riot puts in, like, they just basically say, we want to do the entire round. And it's going to be like 2 million on 10 million valuation. And everyone's super excited to invest now, but they weren't two years ago when the price was that way.
Right.
And I think the only people that really have a shot are the people that are willing to be wrong or look wrong. Like Jensen Huang
right.
may actually be in this bucket where I remember listening to this talk that he gave, I think it's Stanford in 2009, 10 or 11, where he's talking about AI and he's saying, I reoriented the entire company around this vision for the future. And of course, there's no market for AI at that point. And there, in fact, wasn't really an AI market for the next 10 years. But then, by creating these GPUs, suddenly there's a new market appears. It's like Bitcoin and cryptocurrency mining. And then, crypto falls off the cliff in 2021. And then magically Sam Altman comes out with ChatGPT. Yeah. And suddenly, and there's this other acquisition where he spent like $6 billion on Mellanox to, basically, I think, make it so all the GPUs can like network together in a data center in a really like the best way. And he, like, over the course of probably 15 years created this tapestry of interconnectedness that if the vision doesn't pan out, it just doesn't work. Because it did, it's an impossible moat. Mm-hmm. And because of that, if he powers the entire AI revolution, probably.
Yeah. What about non-founders? Is there anyone that springs to mind that you think is artists or politicians or?
It's possible maybe like a dictator of a country. I don't think any president of the United States is going to be that way. I think that they're just kind of like a check mark. I think the only people that would really have a shot are, like, I think in the United States, if you're someone like that, you just go build a company. You're not going into politics in most cases. But I think, maybe like Xi or Putin.
It's getting a little late in the game for Putin.
Well, they're both trying to like live forever now.
Yeah. I love Brian Johnson, but I don't think the cavalry's coming there. I don't think he's going to get there in time to have Putin or Xi Jinping live forever.
Do you think of anyone that's outside of the business world right now? Like you said, Donald Trump, but why?
Yeah, I mean, to be clear, I don't think Donald Trump is in that category. But again, like guys who are holding a lottery ticket, I think Trump has it within his power to revitalize the United States.
Do you think he's likely to do that?
No, I don't.
Okay. So who else outside of him?
I mean, I think you could have, I do think you could have a president who could, like Napoleon didn't found France, but I do think you could have like a Napoleonic like character come through in America and kind of refound it and kind of set it on stable footing again. So someone like, if you're looking for example, Bukele in El Salvador, what he's doing right now. Now El Salvador is so small that,
That's what I was kind of thinking is like in order for you to do that, you have to actually like, he's not going to go conquer America. And so then he has like a limited scope.
I mean, you even look at someone like Lee Kuan Yew, and I just don't think you can really like do a better job than Lee Kuan Yew did. Mm-hmm. Like he's 10 out of 10, ideal, just nailed it. Could not have done a better job as or
at least no one else has done a better job.
No one else has done a better job in a similar circumstance in the modern era. But even then, like Singapore is just not big enough that I don't think Lee Kuan Yew is going to be remembered for 500 years, right? It's just the playground was just a little too small, I think.
I think he might be studied, but I don't think that he's going to be like cherished.
Yeah, correct. I agree.
Yeah.
So I think what you need is like a Lee Kuan Yew at a
larger scale. Yeah.
I also think that you need someone with maybe a little more flair. Like I think the thing that separates Napoleon as like the last great figure of this he set men's imaginations on fire, right? And I actually think that's what Trump has that maybe a Lee Kuan Yew or a Bukele doesn't, is that he does, I think, stir the imagination at the very least, but maybe doesn't have
the execution
in the same way. And then artists, I think the only great medium of our age is filmmaking. And so I think there are a couple filmmakers maybe who could get there. Maybe. Like
in John D. Rockefeller's case, he's got this in the biographies. He talks about basically he's always thinking about conquering, and he's thinking about like he doesn't think of his company in the sense of a company. He thinks of it as almost like a mini nation, and he's like fighting wars, and he's trying to like counter espionage and all this stuff, his competitors. I think like it's super important, the stories and the like internal monologue that goes inside people's heads. How do you think the like greats of the past talk to themselves in a way that's different than the people of today?
I think they didn't. I think they have, again, very little internal monologue, very little self-analysis, because every great person is fundamentally an addict. So what's your internal monologue when an addict is doing meth or heroin or trying to get meth or heroin? There's nothing. There's nothing other than the addiction. And that's how Thomas Edison felt about inventing. That's how Steve Jobs felt about designing. That is how Napoleon felt about conquering. That is how Picasso felt about painting, right? And so I think what you should endeavor to find in your life is the pursuit that blocks all of that out, that makes you feel that way, that you have the only internal
singular
monologue
focus towards a single objective.
Very singular focus, right? And that comes to you naturally. You're not always thinking about focusing, right? Thinking about focusing is itself not focus, right? And so there has to be an attraction not just an attempt to block out everything else, but the thing that magnetically pulls you in so that focus comes naturally. I think that's what you got to think about.